welcome to the show, where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. And today on the show, we have Rio Barrere-Cain. She is a medical student, and she wrote the KevinMD article, Doctors, You Can Increase Voting in the U.S. Rio, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
So I grew up in the Bay Area and went to UCLA for undergrad and then now at UCSF. At UCLA in undergrad, I was in a lot of health fairs and involved in organizing health fairs. So fell in love with the clinical aspect through that and through interacting with patients at the health fair. And then also was able to do research at UCLA, which got me interested in connecting looking at epigenetic mechanisms and kind of regulation of gene expression and how they can help us understand health disparities in our communities. So I'm a MD PhD student at UCSF, trying to bridge those two worlds.
So you wrote the KevinMD article tying civic duty with medicine. So tell me, how did you get interested in that?
Last August, I came across an email and kind of first starting at UCSF, this is my first month here, doing voting registration phone calls. So helping call voters across the country and help them register to vote if they were interested. And so I joined that Zoom call and loved the energy and enthusiasm folks had for helping more people be involved with the democratic process. And also these were residents, these were providers in all different fields coming together, dedicating a whole evening to doing this. And most of the phone calls that evening were in Spanish that I made. And so I decided it would be great to have one of these kind of Zoom calls to reach folks who are interested in voting who spoke Spanish. So I began to organize another phone bank and I put out the email and suddenly I got lots of colleagues that I hadn't, just meeting people. Oh, great to meet you. I saw your email, I'd be super interested. And so through that, I was able to connect with VoteER, which is an organization that helps connect patients who are in clinical spaces with registering to vote. We should be learning about how to do this in our curriculum. We should be learning about how to outreach in a nonpartisan way to get more of our patients to vote. And it seems like we're seeing in these last few years how important policies the impact that policies can have on health through all of this news with COVID. Policies have really direct impacts on our health. And so, and that's the role of providers, is to help our patients advocate, give the patients the ability to advocate for their own health needs. And so what better way to do that than through voting? So we've been able to think about how to incorporate the civic health into medical school curriculum. We were able to meet with some of the leaders at UCSF and having lots of conversations with mentors. And my colleagues here at UCSF was able to kind of flesh out what that would mean and how that could be put into practice.
So let's talk about the KevinMD article that you wrote. It's titled, Doctors, You Can Increase Voting in the U.S. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Yeah, I think it comes from this idea that, it's crystal clear in the last few years how much the government policies impact our health and our community's health. The U.S. is 28th out of kind of 35 nations with similar government structures in terms of voting turnout. And so this is something that we need to address. And providers, specifically physicians, vote 14 percentage points lower than the general population. And so this is an area of growth. And so thinking about how we can make change in this area. And one idea is in our medical school curriculum and in the curriculum in other health professions, as trainees are learning to practice, incorporating civic health into the social history. When you're talking to a patient, asking, are you interested in voting? And can I help you provide resources? Can I provide resources to help register to vote if you are interested? So thinking then about, what are some of the barriers to implementing this? And I think I should back up and kind of describe what civic health is. And to us, the term civic health describes the extent to which communities are able to effectively access democratic resource and kind of draw attention and resources to the problems that they themselves and their communities face, so that to the extent to the participating in that process, and that can be at the local level or the national level. We're thinking kind of, okay, well, what are some of the barriers to implementing this? And I think one key thing that came up in conversation was, okay, well, some providers may not think this is part of the scope of their practice to talk to patients about voting. So I think two things came to mind. One is the role of providers in healthcare systems are in flux and changing, and they can and should evolve. Our understandings do evolve, and the other component to that is that I think we've grown in our understanding of like how much someone's context and kind of social environment impacts health. I think social determinants of health have become a term that is more widely used now, understanding kind of the social environment that impacts someone's health. And lastly, we've seen how much in the last few years government policy can impact a community's health. And we'd love, and this is the core goal of being a provider, is to help give patients the tools and the ability to advocate for their own health. And what better way to do that than through voting? So I think that was kind of one aspect, is kind of to address why this should be something that health providers do. The second is, how do we do this in a nonpartisan way? And I think one thing that comes to mind is we're not advocating for policy change. We're advocating just for those who are eligible to vote to get involved in that process. And this is a core American value, is to be involved in that democratic process. Another point that came up in these conversations was providers are very busy and have a lot going on. With all the things that are on a provider's plate, how are they going to find time and energy to add this into their social history, to talk about voting when it's already a very a packed schedule? One thing that came to mind is that medical students have more time with individual time with patients than, say, a doctor. And the other thing is that this can be something that all health professionals do. So this can be something that nurses and social workers and doctors and other allied professions, that this can be an interprofessional team effort. And lastly, I think when we talk about burnout and feeling like there's too much going on, it can often come from a place of not feeling like you can make change. And giving someone access to voting resources, providing them with a QR code that links them to where they can register to vote, that's a very direct thing that you can do to help increase someone's empowerment. And if you are, we can, there's a lot of issues and a lot of social needs, like maybe perhaps housing, or food access, that we have a role in helping with, but not as direct a way as providing help in registering to vote. I think giving them this very direct way to help a patient with a social need is something that can actually provide a lot of purpose and meaning and fight burnout.
We're talking to Rio Barrere-Cain. She is a medical student. She wrote the KevinMD article, "Doctors, You Can Increase Voting in the U.S." Rio, talk about some of the challenges that people have, people that you talk to during your work at the phone banks. Talk about some of the challenges that they have to access voting.
So I was talking to folks, actually, even some in New York, in times when there was high levels of COVID. And so one fear was how do I do this safely during this time? And I think that we advocated a lot for mailing in your vote, and so that one aspect is how to vote safely during COVID. Another was feeling a sense of disenfranchisement, or kind of like the government isn't representing me, and I don't have a voice in this process, and kind of feeling a little bit down about how the democratic process is working in the US. I think a lot of times also we got, phone banks were really inspirational, because we talked to someone who did just vote, and we talked to them, okay, well, how can you reach out to your friends and family? How can motivate others, especially in times when we're not able to gather in big groups? Can you call your friends and family members and talk about the issues that matter to you? And I saw a lot of kind of folks really are passionate about how these different issues connect, whether it be employment opportunities with COVID, and how that could connect to creating green jobs through, and help with employment, or thinking about how economic recovery and healthcare will look after COVID. I think another issue is language and kind of having enough resources in the language the voter is most comfortable in. It's one thing to be able to access voting materials, but then to have it in the language that's most comfortable for you.
If you're taking a social history and you ask that patient if they're interested in registering to vote and they say yes, please share some of the resources that we could offer them.
Yeah, so Vote ER has a wonderful list of resources. This can be linking to, for example, in California, to the DMV where you can register to vote. This can also be getting like very nonpartisan just description of what the issue is on this next ballot, like kind of to understand the propositions that are coming up, or the people that are running for and the platforms that the candidates are running on. So I would recommend resources like Vote ER, and actually Vote ER on, for example, on your ID badge, you can have QR codes that link specifically to these resources. So Vote ER in different states will have QR codes that specifically link to whatever the states, like in California, to the DMV where you can register to vote. And so having that on your badge when you're walking around clinic, and if someone's interested, you just flip your badge over, show the QR code, and they can scan it right there and then.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Consider incorporating talking about registering to vote with patients during the social history. I think also, stay informed on the policies that are being voted on now, and use your expertise in the clinical field and what you know about how policies impact health, and turn out and vote yourself. So I think talking about how the social history, in the social history, asking patients if they're interested in voting and if they've registered to vote, and then in staying informed on the issues yourself and voting. I think and talking with colleagues and friends, I think a lot of folks are interested, and it's something that when I talk to them, they're like, oh, like that would be interesting. Like I haven't thought about that before.
Mm-hmm.
So starting a conversation in the lunchroom, asking your colleagues what they're thinking about for the next election. I think that dialogue, that discourse is so important for the democratic process. And providers have a lot of privilege and a lot of knowledge in knowing and seeing firsthand how policies impact health. And so to take that knowledge to the polls.
Rio, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.